Okay, mild flex to start today's podcast. I get sent books all the time. Publishers want me to interview authors, put them on the podcast, and a lot of them are parenting books. There's diminishing returns for me as a parenting expert. I'm just not that excited about reading parenting books because I find that generally they don't add a whole lot to the stuff that I do. I am good at what I do. I know what I'm talking about, and usually I just pick holes in people's parenting books because they're not what people really need. The stuff that I've written about is what people need. Long way of saying, I got sent a book a little while ago and I was just like, oh, here we go, another parenting book. And the title of the book made me feel even less inclined. Honestly, I'm like mumming. I'm a dad. We're a really professional podcast. It's all about science and research. And clearly this is a memoir, A Year of Trying and Failing to Be a Better Parent by Victoria Vanstone. And I'm like, oh, I've heard that name. And I checked out the bio. I was like, hang on. Yeah, I've heard of this podcast, Sober Awkward. And there's something about Victoria Vanstone where I'm like, you know what? I had to catch an aeroplane. I'll take the book with me. I'll read a chapter or two. If it's okay, I'll keep reading it. Otherwise, I'm chucking it in the bin like I unfortunately do with so many other books. I couldn't put it down. I laughed my head off. I just got so much joy from reading. And reading is about joy, right? Like so many times we read a book because we've got to get to the end of it. But this was a book that literally brought me joy. I laughed. I actually did cry. I literally got weepy a couple of times. And by the time I'd finished it, I contacted my assistant and said, you got to book this podcast interview in. I have got to talk to Victoria Vanstone. G'day, welcome to the Happy Families podcast, real parenting solutions every day on Australia's most downloaded parenting podcast. My name is Dr. Justin Coulson, the book snob, obviously, and today I'm joined by Victoria Vanstone, a comedy writer, host of the award-winning podcast Sober Awkward. Originally from Reading in the UK, she now lives about 10 k's from me on the sunny coast with her annoyingly nice husband, who she continually refers to as poor John, the dog Sandy, and three, as she describes them, sticky, loud, but occasionally delightful children. Her book is called Mumming, A Year of Trying and Failing to Be a Better Parent. I could continue with the bio. There's so much, but I think I should just introduce you to one of the most delightful authors that I've ever had the privilege of talking to. I know it sounds like a backhanded compliment, Victoria, but I loved your book.
I'm going to have to kind of send this straight to my mum afterwards because what an intro that was. I feel very flattered. Thank you, Justin. Yeah, you can be like my pet in my pocket all the time. Every time I'm feeling a bit down, I'm going to bring you out.
just save this podcast in your favorites and just play the intro every time. I'm not one of those people who likes it when I hear a podcast interview and someone starts reading a person's words back to them out of their book. Like that feels almost like lazy conversation, and yet I'm finding myself compelled to do it. I got to page 9 and I read this, and this is kind of where you got me. You start off by saying, deep inside me somewhere is the mother I wanted to be. The one that kneels, holds shoulders, looks her child in the eyes and says softly, now Fred, we're on the same team. We can figure this out together. Let's go on a treasure hunt. Find your mysterious lost shoe. I know she's there, but like the shoe, I can't find her. She's been replaced with a worn out substitute, a cheaper version. And then I know this is a long quote, but it literally had me. This is that Tom Cruise bit, the whole "you had me at hello." This is the bit that got me. It wasn't meant to be like this. Mumming, I thought I'd love every moment. Be patient, kind, and spend my days reorganising bedrooms and ironing name tags onto school shirts. I wanted to be one of those mums who hums jolly tunes as she throws wooden toys into wicker baskets, sews up holes in socks, and wears flouncy dresses with worn-out maternity knickers beneath. I wanted to know the best chewy chocolate chip cookie recipe off by heart and wear oven gloves, but as the years have ticked by, I get the feeling that woman isn't going to show up. What has emerged from the depths of motherhood is a grumpy troll who throws plastic cups at walls.
Yeah, well, I mean, where is she, that woman? Even you reading that back to me, I'm like, where is that woman? When the hell is she going to show up? Because she certainly isn't here. A little bit of her appears every now and again, and I'm like, oh, there she is. But then she disappears after another round of lost socks and spaghetti on the ceiling and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I'm still trying to find her, but I think she's arriving occasionally in my life, which is nice. It's nice to meet her sometimes.
And the idea is that you wanted to show up more often, but look, the research around this is really vexing, and we talk about it a lot on the podcast. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we did an episode on this. Since the 1970s, 1980s, research into parenting and happiness shows that as the kids come along, your happiness declines. And the more kids you have and the older they get, the more unhappy you become until they become teenagers, where your happiness hits rock bottom. And then when they move out of home, you start to feel happy again. The number one symptom of empty nest parenting is nonstop smiling. So
it makes total sense.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet there's so much meaning, there's so much delight, there's so much heart that goes into it. And we say parenting makes us happy. And in some very real and tangible ways it does, even though the science doesn't pick it up. Let's go through your parenting statistics. How old are your kids at the moment? And how do you deal with the fact that you're not the mum that you hoped you'd be?
I think, well, my kids are 6, 9 and 13, so I'm still in the trenches, as it were. I was a traveller and a bit of a nomad before I had children, and I imagined that my children would slot into my life. I never imagined that they would have their own personalities or characters. I thought I would mould them into the people that I wanted them to be and not have all these, interesting intrinsic character traits that I did not even see coming. So it's been a bit of a shock for me, motherhood. I think that's more of the point. And also I find that we're living in a world where imperfection isn't accepted. And I've found that embracing my imperfections whilst writing and whilst being a mum has actually kind of been my superpower as I've gone along and learnt who I am as a mother. Because I do think it kind of takes some training to work out who I want to be and who I actually am. And I think there was a point very early in the book where I was shouting too much. And it's a trait that's carried on throughout my family. My mum shouted at me and now I shout at my children. And I hear my mum's voice ricocheting around my house. And I realised that I didn't want to be that person. So this book is about that journey, about me trying to become the mum I thought I wanted to be. But actually, it was so interesting writing it because I was trying to do better, but the point kind of got lost along the way because I didn't really get that much better, but that was okay.
Writing does something. There's the processing that's required, the level of thinking that's required. It's different to speaking, right? You can be a little bit loose, you can be a bit glib, you can say things and people get what you're saying even though you're not actually saying it quite clearly. But when you have to write, it demands a level of discipline and thinking that is completely different. And what you've done in this book is articulated precisely that. Start off with a parenting course, committed for the next 12 months that I'm going to be a better parent. And then you kind of get to the end and you say, I don't know if I'm that much better. For what it's worth, I'm reading the book and I think you are. I think you are immeasurably better. I think there's no question about it. But you're sort of going, I'm not sure if I'm better, but I know that now I'm more intentional. I'm more connected to my kids. There's something else that has happened. Is that a fair response to what you're describing as a lack of evolution? I think there actually has been.
Absolutely. I mean, it took me to write it down and see it in black and white to understand that I wasn't as bad as I thought. And that I realised there was this backbone of unconditional love when I was growing up. There's a scene in the beginning of the book where my parents leave me by the side of the road as a child.
Oh, no. I was going to read that to you today instead, but I went for the whole mumming thing. But my goodness, they left you on the side of the road. They've filled up the car and driven off, and they literally don't realise that you're not in the car.
And exactly and I stood by the side of that road with my sister with a feeling of that my parents were coming back. I never ever questioned. I knew it was a mistake. And that was the unconditional love that was the scaffold of my life and is what I bring to my children. I stood there strong by that road, knowing that my parents were going to pull up at any minute, come out of the car, grab us and take us on our holiday. And at the beginning of the book, I say, this isn't a book about perfect parenting. It's a book about always coming back. So sometimes I'm not a perfect parent. In fact, very often, and I don't think all of us mums are. We live in this world of comparison where we're supposed to be perfect all the time, but it's not perfect. And when I'm at mothers groups and things, the stories that I hear, is I went to the shops and left the baby, I left the baby in the house and had to drive back down the road. The humour and the reality of parenting is very, very different than the expectation. And it was such a joy to write this book and go, look, who am I as a mum? And who am I going to become? And what I learned was that I was enough in the first place. And that unconditional love that I felt while I stood by that road as a little kid is still existing in my world today. And even if I do get things wrong, my kids have something to fall back on. And that is that scaffolding, that unconditional love that I try to bring into everything, even if I do occasionally throw plastic cups at walls.
So you're very, very funny. You're quite irreverent. I'm a non-coarse language person. You don't mind a bit of a swear. And as I'm reading the book, I'm kind of going, this is really confronting, but my goodness, there's so much heart. I just love it so much. I'm not going to read anything else to you after this. This is the last thing I'll read to you, I promise.
Okay, go on.
But this is a sense for people who are listening to the chat and going, oh, I wonder if I'd like where is this really going? Every page is punctuated with joy and humour and delight. I just laughed so much. Until I was 11, I thought girls got pregnant. I should just quickly mention, content warning, if you've got the kids in the car, the next 30 seconds could be a little bit of an issue, but other than that, we'll be very, very polite. Until I was 11, I thought girls got pregnant by letting a boy put his tongue in their mouth, that an orgasm was something that lived in a rock pool, and that a blowjob was when you had your hair done at Carol's on High Street.
That is actually, I mean, it's funny because it's true. All of my stories, unfortunately, people said, oh, I don't believe it. I can't believe it. I was like, I couldn't make this up if I tried, quite honestly.
You are ridiculously funny. But in the book, as much as it's funny, like we've already covered, there's a lot of heart. But something happens during this year of trying to mum perfectly that is just every parent's greatest fear, greatest nightmare. You have a near-death experience. Walk us through that and talk about how that left you feeling.
We were on a camper van holiday to Perth, and I've handed my son a Chupa Chup, and I thought, I'm not really sure whether I should be doing this. He was kind of, 4 or 5, and it was like, I'm handing it over, but there's a stage where you sort of think, well, should they be allowed this? It's a bit jokey. Anyway, we took off in the camper van, and I heard the noise that any mother, or father would hate to hear at any point throughout their lives. And it was my son unable to get air. And I turned around and we tried to revive him, and he was going blue. Like, it's your worst choking nightmare. There's a reason we cut grapes in half, because all parents are pretty paranoid about a choking situation. So my worst fears were playing out in front of me. I had to run out into a road. I had to shout for help, and get an ambulance there. And it was just it was the most terrifying experiences. And in that moment, how they say life slows down and you see your life flash in front of you. I just thought, gosh, I'm now becoming the mother who lost her child. That's who I'm going to be now. And within this kind of chaotic moment, there was a slow thought in my head was, this is who I am becoming. And it was so frightening. Luckily, my son Fred survived that day. A builder ran out of a building site and stuck his fingers down my son's throat and saved his life somehow. We're not really sure how it happened and how he managed to revive my little boy. But I feared afterwards that one of my children would die at any moment. It shows the fragility of life very clearly to me. 1 minute we're okay and having the holiday of our lives, and the next minute we're in a life or death situation. And that kind of shook my ground beneath me, because I was like, oh, well, everyone's okay and we all survive, and aren't we a strong and lovely family? To the point where, oh gosh, this could change at any moment and everything could fall apart. And it left me feeling very, very anxious, very concerned about the health of my children, feeling like someone was going to die at any moment. And actually, I had to go and have some therapy and to understand the reasons I'd got completely overwrought with anxiety and panic that one of my children was going to pass away at any minute.
The vulnerability is enormous. And it reminds me, a couple of years ago, I was surfing and caught a wave, went headfirst into a sandbank.
Wow.
The wave just absolutely drilled me, and I fractured my neck and my back in the same instant, and had to be sort of carried out of the water, and the ambos took me off to the hospital and that kind of thing. And it's that fragility, like you said, that vulnerability. When you look at it, there's a couple of things that stood out to me. Number one, you were willing to say, I'm not doing well. So you went and participated in a therapeutic approach to help you to work through it. Do you feel like you ever really get over that? Like, is it always sort of there in the back of your mind, or at some point you just learn to function again?
I think that's 100% right. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, I I am over that situation. I did get help to understand that that is something that can happen in life. And when you have children, what you also create is risk.
Right.
When you love people that much, you also create a fear of anything happening to them. That is parenthood in a nutshell, really, isn't it?
Actually, now that you say it, we mentioned this on the pod. I can't believe it skipped my mind. But while I was reading the book and reading about that, and now just thinking about you saying this, about the same time that all this was happening, my daughter fell off a horse, and the horse ran across her face, and fractured her eye socket, and that was maybe 8 or 10 weeks ago now, and she's fine. She's recovering. There's been all kinds of medical interventions and things that were required, and you get that sense of everything can change in an instant with the smallest thing. You trip stepping off the curb and you fall, and there's a bus coming. Like this sort of stuff can happen. So fragile. What are your greatest learnings when you look at this near-death experience? I mean, your son you were watching him die in front of your eyes. What are your biggest learnings from this?
I mean, it is learning that my love means risking loss. I think that is part of having children. And I never realized that before I had children. I just thought, well, you have them and they grow up and you teach them and you hope for a good life and you teach them to be good or bad and, what's right and wrong. And then there's some things you can't control. And I think that's what it's taught me, is that I can't control everything. And there's points where you have to try and let them go a little bit, and you have to stretch that umbilical cord much further than you wish to. And that is really confronting and happens in different stages throughout parenting. For me, it's happening now because I've got a 13-year-old son who wants to go to the plaza on his own. And I'm always being stretched and tested as a mum. And it's me trying to learn how to accept those stretches and step into them without fear, which for me sometimes takes some therapy. I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I have to reach out for help. This has happened, I fall apart occasionally in my life because, there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot going on. I was a binge drinker for 25 years. Anytime I fall apart, like I did with my drinking, I reach out for help. And that is something that I recommend to anybody. Don't ever suffer with anything on your own. And I had to learn how to live with risk, and the risk that I might lose my children at any moment, which sounds like something we should just push away and think, let's not think about it. It will never happen. But I was so confronted with it. It was so real that I had to go, right, this is something that is part of my life now. And I have to deal with it. And I have to learn to live with it in a way that's not going to make me a paranoid, crazy woman. And so that's what I do. I live with the fact that love contains risk, and it is heartwarming and heartbreaking all in the same breath, which I find parenting, it's a life affirming and soul destroying, I think I write in the book, in one moment. 1 minute I'm crying in a pillow and the next we're running down a sand dune towards the ocean. And it can be that between 2 minutes. So I think it's the kind of absurdity and the joys and the risks and the love all mixed up in this crazy kind of world that we live in as parents, especially when you've got 3 kids like me. It's kind of learning that the chaos is okay. And that's what I try to embrace now, is that it might not be great all the time. It might be awful sometimes, but there are moments where it is beautiful.
Her book is called Mumming, A Year of Trying and Failing to Be a Better Parent. You're an award-winning podcast host. You're a writer. Essentially, you spend your day in front of a computer. You're a content producer, a content creator. It's one of those things that's really hard to switch off. It's one of those things that requires you to always be scanning your environment, finding content, jotting things down, making notes, looking for ways that you can recraft what you've built. Your daughter comes to you one day and says, and I quote, "Mummy, do you love your laptop more than me?"
This has probably been one of my biggest lessons in the book. There's various things that happen, go wrong, go right. But this was one moment where I realized I was working more than parenting, and I was putting my children after my work. And because success has come at a very odd time for me. I have never really had a proper job. I was traveling the world. I sold jewelry on the markets. I was kind of this traveling nomad with a backpack and no care apart from where my passport was going to next. So I never really had any stability. And then I found a career only 7 years ago when I gave up drinking and started writing and podcasting. And so it's come at an odd time for me, whereas I've got 3 children and I'm trying to be successful at the same time. And it can be really hard for mums, trying to combine the work, the chores, making sure everyone's happy, making sure everyone's fed. And it's like I'm balancing all these plates. They're all spinning around and occasionally they smash on the floor. So for me, I actually ended up going to a breathwork. I went a bit woo-woo in part of the book and went to a breathwork course, which opened up this side of my brain, which I never even knew existed. I am a bit woo-woo. I didn't even know it was in me, quite honestly. And it really made it clear that I was prioritizing my work over my children. And so I have a funny kind of peculiar characteristic, whereas if I feel like I'm doing something wrong, I seek the answers to make it right. And that's exactly what I did here. And I did it with my own self-esteem when I felt like I wasn't happy with my body image. And I do it with all sorts of things, whereas I go, okay, this doesn't feel right as a parent. I don't feel like I'm parenting in the way that I expected. So therefore, I'm going to find an alternative way that's going to give me some answers. And that's what I do in every aspect in my life. I knew at that point that my daughter needed me to play with her. And I was like, right. And I made some rules that day that I was going to turn off my laptop before they got home from school, turn it on after, and I created a kind of pattern where my children wouldn't feel the loss of me. Do you know what I mean? It's like they wouldn't feel that I was not there for them. Because, part of my giving up drinking as well is that I'm trying to be more present and more available for my children and not preoccupied with wine or what's happening outside of my household. So when I'm in those moments with my children and I could see with her little glowing eyes looking at me saying, Mummy, I want to play with you, I knew I had to change. And so I seek the answers to make those changes.
Your story reminds me of something that happened early in our family. I wrote my first book, which let me give a shameless plug for my book called What Your Child Needs From You. I wrote it years and years and years ago. And when my wife, Kylie, was reviewing chapter 1 to make sure that she was okay with the stories that I was sharing and where the book was going, she came across a list of statements. This is a questionnaire for parents to consider. My parents support me. My parents console me when I'm upset. My parents show they care about me. My parents show a genuine interest in me. My parents remember things that are important to me. My parents are available to talk at any time. My parents ask questions in a caring manner, and so on. And as we talked about those questions, she said, you know what we need to do? We need to do a parenting performance appraisal. And so we sat down with the kids one-on-one. I played with them in the living room. Kylie sat with them one-on-one in the dining room. And she went through and she took notes as they answered these questions. And some of the things that they said were just beautiful and delightful and made us feel like we were great parents. Yeah. And other things that they said were a bit like you hearing, Mummy, do you love the laptop more than me? I remember a distinct quote from our third daughter, Ella. She said, when Dad's busy on the computer, or you, Mum, when you're doing craft, when Kylie does craft, it just overtakes the entire house, right? The dining room table, the kitchen bench, the living room. Like, you can't find your way through the house. It's bedlam. She said, when Dad's on the computer or when you're doing craft, it feels like, and this was a direct quote from a 7-year-old girl, it feels like you're not emotionally available to me.
Yeah, right.
And we just went, wow, what are we doing here? I read that line and it all just came back to me. I thought, they really require our presence, don't they? They just so badly. And they do. They measure their worth based on the amount of connection. Are they feeling seen and heard and valued?
Yeah. And it's taken me a long time to learn that. I hate to admit it. I realized that I was excited about, having a successful podcast and actually being, putting some energy into something that I thoroughly enjoyed for the first time in my life, and writing and people reading it. And, that sort of praise and someone going, you are good enough all of a sudden, from me not really knowing myself or having an identity in this world because I was just this kind of crazy party animal. And suddenly to have, these people saying, oh, yeah, you're a good podcaster and you're like an amazing writer. And it felt amazing. And that kind of overtook for a moment. It overtook my brain. It was very easy to latch on to the compliments of others because it made me feel good. And I was like, and that started to prioritize. And I realized now that I was basing my own self-worth on the opinions of others, which is very, very risky ground to be standing on, honestly, very shaky. And so I'm getting better at that now. I'm not perfect at it either. I'm never, ever going to claim perfection in anything, as you can probably tell. But I'm trying really hard to make sure that I am available and I have time for my children and that my distractions are in my own time.
Victoria, speaking about being emotionally available, there may be no better way to be emotionally available than to go camping. Tell me about camping.
Do you want the best parenting hack of all time? Am I going to give it away on the podcast before they read the book?
I don't know if you should actually share it, because what you did in this was part genius and just part it's diabolical. I have to sound judgy for a minute.
I don't mind.
I cannot believe that you do it, and at the same time I'm going, yeah, makes sense completely. It's up to you whether you share it or not. But before you do, I will highlight that when I take my kids camping, I make sure that we go somewhere where I don't have to cook. So I'm not going to cook on a campfire stove or anything like that. We're going to go camping, and I am going to order pizza, or I'm going to go and get some pasta or some fish and chips down the road. Wherever we go, there has to be food accessible, because I refuse to deal with all the rubbish that goes along with trying to cook and clean up the mess that happens with camping cooking. It's just too hard. Anyway, tell me about you and camping, now that I've spilled the beans about mine.
There's a lot of things I don't like about it. I mean, camping in England was a little bit more straightforward, because there weren't snakes and wombats and all sorts of horrible creatures wandering around at night. And yeah, I just find it hard work. I want to sort of pretend that I like fishing shirts and I'm happy to go camping, but I don't. So I'm going to share my hack with you.
Okay.
I go camping with my children, and there's a rule that we camp within a 5-kilometre radius of the house. The children don't really know about this, because you can actually just drive around for a couple of hours. They wouldn't really know where we are, so they might think that we're really far away. That's another. Just drive around in circles and actually just go down the road. And I get there, we have a lovely time. I spend the whole time shouting, car, car, because I'm worried that one of them's going to get run over. They all disappeared into places where I've never been, with people I've never met before, which is also quite anxiety inducing. But what I do is I cook, I'm very focused, I'm very good mummy. And then I zip them into their little sleeping bags. And as soon as their eyes closed, I steal the car keys out of my husband's shorts, and I wheel spin at 5 kilometers per hour out of the campsite. And I go home, I have a bath, I put on a good Netflix cult series usually, so I'm quite into, and I sleep at home. And I get up, I set an alarm for 5 o'clock, I get back to the campsite before they wake up, and they don't even know I've been gone. There is no way that I'm going to sleep on one of those blow up mattresses with sand in it, where I kind of shoot into the air when my husband gets into bed. I just can't do it. And they all know that it's a good thing, because if I've slept well, I'm a nice mummy. And most mummies out there and daddies will know that if you haven't slept at all, that weekend is going to be a total write-off anyway, because I'm going to be like that grumpy ogre stomping around on my dusty camping spot, being just like a nightmare. So yeah, I sneak off and I sleep at home, and nobody knows about it, and everyone is much better off.
I still can't work out whether this is genius or appalling, but I love it.
It's genius, Justin.
I really love it.
It's genius. It's about the hacks, I think, parenting. If you can find a few hacks and kind of jump through some loopholes, then I'm all up for it. I'm basically like the anti-parenting expert. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you to read books or make you feel guilty. I'm actually going to say to you, jump through the hoops and leave the campsite without anyone knowing, and find the loopholes. It makes life a lot easier. There's no guilt or shame then.
Okay, so you're a self-confessed non-parenting expert. You've written a book about mumming. It really, truly is delightful. I'm going to spin this around for just a minute. I've been interviewing you. Let's say that you're interviewing me. If there was one question that you could ask a parenting expert, what would you ask?
Gosh, that is such a good question. I think I would ask, so if I read a parenting book and it was telling me how to do something and I was failing at it, for example, if my sleep routine wasn't working out and I bought a book about kids' sleep routines and still I couldn't achieve what the book was telling me to do, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to feel?
That's a horrible question. That's such a hard question. I have a joke sometimes if I give a presentation at the end of the night, I'll say, hey, my books are at the back. I can't promise you that reading this book is going to make you a better parent, but I know if you buy it, you definitely will be a better parent. Like, to me, that's my big joke. You didn't even laugh. You didn't even smile at that. I thought that was really, really funny. Tough crowd. Clearly, I'm not the comedian in this conversation.
Sorry.
So here's my standard response. Actually, there's a two-part response. First off, when it comes to buying books about getting kids onto a sleeping routine, I'm generally against it. I don't think that those books are particularly helpful or healthy.
Okay, interesting.
But that's another story, and I could upset a lot of people by saying that. So let's just focus on the main thing that I will talk to parents about. When you hear genuinely good parenting advice, scientifically evidence-based, the sort of stuff that I would share in my books and in my seminars, there's a point that I make, and it's this. If you want to go and learn how to speak Spanish because you're going to go on a holiday to Mexico or Spain or wherever, how many mistakes do you need to make before you become fluent? And the answer will usually be somewhere around 1 million. Or if you want to learn how to play great music on the piano or the drums or the violin or the guitar, how many mistakes will you need to make before you become adept, before you become fluent, before you become really competent? And again, the answer has to be somewhere around 1 million. I mean, I'm making up the number, but whatever it is, it's an enormous amount of mistakes before you become proficient and good at it. And I think honestly, parenting is one of those things where we need to engage in deliberate practice. You can't just read a book and say, okay, well, now I'm going to be better. You might get some general reminders about being available to your kids or listening better or, I don't know, summarizing their feelings when they're having a hard time. And that will in some way make you a better parent. But fundamentally, if you want to truly get better at anything, you have to practice it. You have to make mistakes, and then you have to intentionally process it. And again, I guess that brings me full circle to you and your book about mumming, A Year of Trying and Failing to Be a Better Parent. The fact that you sat down and were intentional and processed it and wrote about it, it has to have made you a better parent. You jokingly say, no, I didn't really get any better at parenting in that year. But when I read the book, I can't believe that you didn't become more attuned to your kids, more aware of your own foibles and errors so that you can start to proactively guard against them. I just don't think you can.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's about awareness. And I think just having awareness of my failures and my successes has enabled me to look beyond them almost and to understand that, you know, having lots of information, whether I agree with it or whether it works or not, is a good way to deal with any situation, isn't it? Whether you read the books and take it in and use those techniques, it doesn't really matter. But having the information, absorbing all of the information possible. I mean, it's the same with sobriety. I get a lot of people coming to me asking questions about how do I stop drinking? How do I get sober? You know, and I say, well, there's a varied amount of tools. You know, you can go to therapy, you can go to AA, you can, you know, go to rehab. There's all these different things. And at the end of the day, I hate that saying, but it's about whatever works. And for me, it took a lot of things in my parenting to work out what works for me. And one of them was writing a book. But it was the same with my sobriety. I had to walk lots of walks and talk lots of different talks to be able to understand what works for me. And that can be the wrong psychiatrist for the first year of your sobriety. And then you have to find someone else and you have to pivot and adjust. And it's the same with parenting. You know, I read all the books and a lot of the books made me feel really guilty. And that, you know, that paper plane of guilt is something that has glided along next to me throughout my parenting because of the high expectations we have in this modern culture. And I think learning and just using these tools, like your amazing tools, and using it as information is going to be something that is just going to help you. And whether you put it into practice or you fail at it, it's still just really good information, isn't it?
Victoria, I really appreciate that question and your insights around it and the opportunity to share that. My answer really is just practice. But let's go back to you and wrap this up. I love the book Mumming. Your first book, though, I want to talk about that for just a second. And the reason for it is as follows. Neither Kylie nor I drink alcohol. We're non-drinkers. We're completely, teetotalers. And basically always have been. And so every now and again, we get podcast requests where somebody says, could you just talk about mummy wine time? Could you talk about beer o'clock? Could you talk about parents' reliance on alcohol? And we really have wanted to have that conversation, but we are not the right people for that discussion. You, on the other hand, host a podcast called Sober Awkward. You're really upfront about your extended sobriety and your effective decisions in overcoming alcohol. And your first memoir, I mean, you're a memoirist, right? Is that a word, memoirist?
I think it is a word, yes.
I think even if it's not, it works. Your first book was a memoir. The second one is as well. But your first one, I just want to touch on it for a sec in regards to this mummy wine time concept. 1,000 wasted Sundays.
Yeah.
Just talk about parenthood, alcohol, sobriety, and your book, wherever you'd like to take it.
Yeah, so I class myself as a socially acceptable binge drinker. Just like most people I know, I sort of found a niche for myself between the pub and an AA meeting where I was sort of falling through the gaps because I didn't feel worthy of professional help. I didn't feel like I was bad enough to deserve anyone to step in or even to talk to it about it to anybody. I started to suffer severe anxiety after I had my first child. I'd always been that party animal, like last man standing on any dance floor. And I was kind of proud of that. It was my identity. It was my persona. It was who people wanted from me. And I didn't look outside of that ever. I was never a daily drinker. I don't think I was ever physically addicted to alcohol, but I was definitely mentally addicted to this persona and a preoccupation to where my next drink was coming from when I'd had that first one. So, and I come from a family of party animals. They're all lovely people, but they do like a drink at a party. So I kind of absorbed that from a very, very young age. And I feel like alcohol, whether it was culturally, environmentally, or generationally, was coming at me at every direction from the moment I was born. And by giving up, I feel like, maybe I didn't have a choice about alcohol, but now we have an alcohol-free house. I hope that it gives my own children a choice about what they do with it. And it's been just a wonderful journey learning about the role, not only that it plays in the individual, but also within our communities and how it affects our parenting. And when I had my first child, all of a sudden I had this consequence to my drinking habit. I was the perfect mum, with the excreting bliss balls for breakfast, with the perfect throws over my pram. And at the weekend, I wanted to let my hair down. I'd met this amazing mothers group. And, while they sat at the table having a nice glass of wine, I was probably up at the bar ordering shots, trying to give everyone a good time, because that's all I knew. So there was no learnings or teaching about this transition from party girl to mum. And these two people collide halfway through my first book, 1,000 Wasted Sundays, where I'm in my bedroom with a baby crying beyond my hangover and I can't look after my child. And so I'd never really had any consequences before. I mean, I blew a finger off with a firework. I had recreational drug use, a violent relationship. There were red flags whipping me across the face for many, many years. But this one was one that I couldn't run away from. I couldn't pack my bag and leave the next day. I had a child that needed me. And it took me 4 years of trying moderation and failing. And I think there's only so long you can, go wrong at something before you have to reach out and do something about it. And actually, I had a second child. And 6 weeks after she was born, I went out and got hugely drunk. Woke up the next morning with that anxiety monster sitting at the end of my bed and walked into the lounge and said to my husband, I don't feel like an alcoholic, yet alcohol is having a massive impact on my life. And I feel like I need to do something about it. And that's when my journey to sobriety started. I reached out for help. I started writing about it. I started podcasting about it because I feel like there's this place, this really interesting sort of grey area where everybody's drinking at a social level. They're suffering with anxiety the next day, but they're not really sure if their problem's bad enough. And what I worked out was that it's not about alcohol. It's about finding out who you were before it and who comes after it. And that's what the journey is. And it doesn't matter whether it's one glass of wine a day or one glass of wine a month. It's about your own mental relationship with it and working out whether you're doing it for the right reasons and whether it's having any impact whatsoever.
Hearing you say that, there are so many questions that I want to ask you. We could do another full podcast about it.
Yeah, totally.
I'm just going to refer people to the book, 1,000 Wasted Sundays by Victoria Vanstone. Of course, the main purpose of our conversation today is about your most recent book, Mumming, A Year of Trying and Failing to Be a Better Parent. Victoria, we're going to link to both of those books in the show notes. I can't believe how fast the time's gone. This has been such a delightful and fun conversation. So grateful for your time and really grateful for A, your humour, and B, your insights in what turned out to be a surprisingly delightful read for the parenting expert who's a little bit snobby when it comes to reading parenting books. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for being snobby and accepting me into your realm of the good ones. I appreciate it.
Yeah, 100%. Victoria Vanstone,
Thanks,
the author of Mumming, A Year of Trying and Failing to Be a Better Parent. We will link to that in the show notes. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Thank you for all your great work, Justin. And if you'd like more information and resources to make your family happier and maybe funnier, no, you need Victoria for that. Visit happyfamilies.com.au.